Module 3: The Practice of Language Assessment. Building quality systems for language assessments. When we say that any product or service is of good quality, we generally mean that it consistently lives up to or is better than what we expect. For many people, a good quality car is safe and comfortable and always starts when we want it. A good quality hotel has clean, quiet, and comfortable rooms with equipment that works well and staff who respond promptly and politely when we have a request. When thinking about buying a new product or using a new service, people often want to find out something about its quality. They may read reviews on websites or in magazines or ask their friends it, or they may try using it for a short period of time to find out if they like it. The expectation people have of any service product will depend partly on their needs. People look for different things in a hotel depending on whether they will stay there or alone on a business trip for one night or with their family on a vacation for a week. Expectations are also affected by factors such as price. People don't expect 5-star luxury in a cheap hotel, and they don't expect a small cheap car to go very fast or to be as smooth as or and comfortable as limousine. Similarly, it would be unrealistic to expect teachers working under strict time pressure to produce assessment with the same qualities that are demanded of tests by a large national or international testing agencies. Equally, large testing agencies can be expected to produce assessments that takes into account what an individual teacher has chosen to cover in a class over the past few weeks. But what expecting what expectation should assess on the other hand, or users of assessment results have different types of assessment, and as the producers of assessments, what can we do to ensure that the assessments we make are good as they can be, that they are of high quality? According to White 1998, ideas about equality borrowed from business management have become increasingly influential in language education. Two concepts of particular importance to language assessment are standards and quality management. Standards describe desirable characteristics of products and services, such as consistency, environmental friendliness, safety, and economy. When products are or system work well and safely at an economical cost, it is often because they meet predetermined standards. Quality management is a means of achieving and surpassing standards and involves continuous improvement in the effectiveness and efficiency of an organization and the process it carries out. This module will look at quality standards for language assessment and steps that can be taken to build the principle of continuous improvement into their development and ongoing use. Module 2 showed that the concept of assessments includes practices, that are carried out to meet a very wide variety of different purposes. It is inevitable that high quality should have different meanings for a classroom. Teachers experimenting with the new approaches to formative assessment, a program leader asked to develop achievements tasks for use it in a college, and the Ministry of Education or testing agency developing a new text or test for use nationwide. Different uses of language assessment are sometimes seen to be mutually incompatible. Some commentators suggest that large-scale efficiency tests and classroom assessments should each be approached in a different way. The resources available in each setting, the kinds of information needed, and the implication of decisions that will be made are certainly quite different. On the other hand, assessment of all kinds of obtaining good quality evidence of assesses knowledge, skills, or abilities. The principles presented in the module are based on the practical advice offered in a range of language assessment textbooks and are intended to be relevant across the broad spectrum of language assessment contexts. Projects to develop a new assessment, especially at the classroom or program level, are often seen by those involved as one of linear exercise with clear-cut beginning and endpoints. It is decided that an assessment is needed. The content is settled on. Procedures are sketched out, and the questions or items are written. Or perhaps a test is bought in from a publisher or other external organization. The assessment is administered to a group of learners. Scores are awarded, decisions are taken, and certificates are handed out. The work is complete. Sometimes an assessment is used once and then discarded. The next time everyone starts again from the beginning. Sometimes the same assessment is used again, unchanged. The first of these choices is an obvious and impractical waste of resources, rather like buying a new car. Each time you need to travel somewhere, and the second is irresponsible and potentially dangerous, like buying a new car, suspecting there is a serious problem with the brakes, but instead of taking it back to the dealer for investigation and repairs, ignoring the problems and continuing to drive around it. Poor quality assessment practices may not cause physical injuries, but they do produce misleading results and so can have damaging consequences both for the assessees and for the people who use the result as a basis of decisions. According to Papan, 2001 argued that in addition to the familiar problems of limited resources and lack of time, many teachers suffer from a lack of assessment literacy. They have not received training in basic assessment principles and do not understand how assessments and teaching can complement each other. According to Konim, 2009 cited a number of shortcomings in teacher-made language assessments that could result from this lack of assessment literacy. Tests made by the teachers, often too easy or too difficult for learners, fail to reflect what learners have achieved, and contain content that has not been taught or included on the syllabus. Effective assessment comes at a price. Not every institution has the resource to employ the full array of trained language assessment professionals listed by Buck, including specialist assessment writers, psychometricians, and graphic designers. Nonetheless, all institutions certainly do have the capacity to improve on their current practice. Fortunately, acknowledging a few basic principles can help to develop assessments literacy for improving the quality of practice. These principles can be summed up by acronym PRICE. P for planning, reflection, improvement, cooperation, and evidence. Planning. Planning should always be built into the development of a new project, and assessment are no exception. The more thorough, the better assessment is likely to be. Reflection and review are fundamental to good quality system. The effectiveness of planned and current materials and practices in fulfilling their purpose should constantly be questioned and evaluated. Improvement on current materials and practices always be possible and should be consistent aim to assessment system. Reflection is directed towards making improvements. Cooperation and teamwork are essential to the development of a good assessment materials and practices. Evidence is the basis for good decision making. Reflection based on a good evidence is making more constructive than prejudice guesswork as a means of improving quality. Now let's go to the planning, reflection, and improvement. The first three price principles, planning, reflection, and improvement, suggest a regular plan, do review, schedule in which assessments are evaluated and ideas for improvement forward of integration within the plans for the next time assessment will be used. These principles do not only apply to locally developed materials assessments that have worked well in the location with one group of learners may not work equally well in another. Materials that is bought in from publishers or external agencies should be subject to the same process of critical review as a locally developed by material. The checklist provided in the next three chapters are intended to help in this process. Thus, two of price principles, cooperation and evidence, are conditions required to take planning reflections and the improvement of effective. Now let's go to the cooperation. One cause of poor assessment practices is mistaken belief that individual expertise or experience can guarantee equality. An experienced teacher is trusted to produce and carry out assessment in a better way than novice. An expert in assessment is assumed to produce better materials than teacher with no specialist training. May seem reasonable, but even assessment materials produced by the most skilled, best trained individuals have faults and idiosyncrasies. Weir 1993 stressed the point that developing assessment should be a group activity. Individuals acting alone are very unlikely to be able to plan, design, and put into practice A really effective assessment system, in fact, teamwork of various kinds of essentials to good assessment. First, it is important to, at the planning stage, to agree on standards that the team will work towards. If individual teachers or testers each use very different approaches, either in creating assessments or in judging performance, learning can become a disjoint and confusing experience. Davidson and Lynch argued that good assessments are developed by the consensus rather than by the imposition. When people combine their efforts and everyone involved has a say in the development of assessment system, there is much better chance that it will run successfully and the problems will be minimized. Another aspect of cooperation is link of reflection. The work of team members should be checked and repeatedly evaluated. A second opinion on assessment materials is always necessary. Someone with a different point of view is often able to spot problems and errors that one writer or one scorer may have missed. Wherever possible, classroom teachers should work with their colleagues in regularly reviewing their overall approach and the decisions made when awarding scores. At the program level, enough resources must be made available to allow for regular review of all assessments, materials, and procedures. It should also kept in mind that effective reflection and review needs to supportive and professional environment in which criticism is objective and it's not taken to be personally malicious. As one teacher involved in developing assessment said of the experience of team's work, I learned to open to and willing to accept group mates criticisms. Collecting evidence, a very widespread shortcoming in much assessment practice, is paradoxically that the assessment itself often goes unexamined. It is surprisingly rare for assessment users to attempt in any systematic way to find out whether the decision taken based on assessment result were the right decisions. Precautions may be taken to guard against obvious disasters. Questions that are too difficult for the students test prepare, getting to lost or stolen. Recording to equipment breaking down, but few people or institution seriously try to answer important questions of whether the assessment has really provided information that is comprehensive and useful as it could be, and whether things might be done better next time. Where language learners really plays into the most appropriate classes on the basis of placement tests, where insights from self-assessment used effectively to improve learning, following a university entrance test were the best suited people accepted into the course onto the course, or were new employees hired after taking proficiency test really able to carry out their work in the foreign language. Adequate answers to questions like these will only be found if evidence is collected rigorously and systematically. However, in many educational systems, apart from scores or grades, very little information of any kind is ever collected about the assessments. In these circumstances, it is impossible to be confident that an assessment has provided relevant and adequate information about the assessees. As another vital source of evidence, every language assessment's handbook insists that material must be tried out or trialed in some way, particularly if it's used to be in a high-stake assessment, one that leads to decisions with serious consequences for the assessee, without compromising the security of any confidential test material. Assessee who are similar as possible to those who will take the operational assessment. The responses to each question are recorded and scored, and results are analyzed statistically to learn whether the material is really capable of providing the kind of information it is designed to collect. Reports about the experience collected from test takers and those involved in administering the assessment can also help in identifying problems. Statistical analysis plays a particular important role in the practice of language assessment, particularly in support of formal testing. At least a basic understanding of statistics is needed to understand how tests are made, how results should be interpreted, a short overview of the key techniques and their applications can be found on the websites that accompanies this book. Fuller assessment or to be found in Batchman. If nobody explains just what the assessment is supposed to measure, it is impossible to judge whether or not it has been successful in measuring and capturing anything meaningful. If nobody keeps a record of the answers that assessees give to each question, it becomes impossible to tell whether some of the questions are problematic, if which are incorrect. When different people score an assessment, each one may judge the same answer differently. If nobody sets out how much time assessees should be allowed or what source help they can use, some may unfairly be given more time or receive more help than others. In these circumstances, in the absence of standards for the language assessment, the result may be meaningless and so cannot be useful. Practices will certainly need improvement, but without evidence, it will not be clear how they should be improved. Now let's go to the assessment cycle. When improvement is sought, assessments and assessment system should not be seen just a product or as event or even as a series of linked events that lead to a decisions about the assessee. Instead, assessee should be viewed as continuous and repeating cycles of activities. The process does not end when a decision about assessee is made, but can be modified and improved before the cycle begins again. The next time around, the quality of assessment will be better. Within the overall cycle, it is useful to identify a sequence of activities, each associated with a particular function or role. Each role may be carried out by a different person or group of often, and some may be even carried out automatically by machines. On the other hand, one person or group may carry out several roles. In large-scale assessment programs, each activity will involve detailed documentation so that different groups or individuals can coordinate their contributions. Teachers, especially if working more or less independently on classroom assessment, will not be able to keep extensive records but will need to consider efficient ways keeping track of and communicating the process that their students are making on their learning, how well their approach has worked, and how their assessments fit into an overall school program. Breaking down the cycle into different stages involved can help to do this. Figure 3.1 represents the different roles involved the assessment cycles and the various documents used to record each stage. The role and their associated documents are discussed in the paragraph that follows. Next one. Stage 1, the designer's objective and specification. As we saw in Module 1, and as Hugs 2003 insisted, the essential first step in assessment is to know for what purpose. Compare the design of an assessment to architect of a house. The architect begins with an understanding of the purpose of the building that he or she is going to design. Consider the location and the available budget and turns this into plans for the construction of a building. The architect provides detailed drawing and instructions for the builders. These plans include the materials to be used and precise layout of the rooms and so on. The assessment cycles, roles, responsibilities, and documentation. Just as the architect needs to know before beginning the design whether the building is intended as a family home or a shopping center. The designer of an assessment needs to be clear about the decision. The assessment is intended to inform. Many assessment projects fail before they begin because too little attention is given to what people who will use the result to make decisions. The assessment users really need to know about the assessee. Often, at the outset, the users themselves may not be very clear about what kind of information they really need. This reinforces the need for cooperation. The designer of the assessment will need to consult closely with the users and to be sure that they build a shared understanding of the intended purpose. From the outset, as a part of the planning progress or process, it is necessary to decide who will be involved in each stage of delivery and administration and to take account of their views in developing the assessment. Architects do not, of course, begin from nothing. They can draw on centuries of human experience in constructing homes, offices, shops, and factories, and long-standing knowledge of traditional building materials and techniques. In making their plans, they can combine the established traditions with innovations such as newly developed materials and new ideas for design. Similarly, good assessment designers will have an understanding of what they believe language ability consists of how this relevant to the context in which the assessment will be used, the particular purpose and particular population of assessees they have in mind. They will know how language abilities have been assessed by others in the past, or how they assess others' context. They will also be aware of the effects that the use of different techniques available may have on those involved. The designers of formative classroom assessment system need an understanding of how languages are learned and how best to use the information from assessment to guide ongoing learning. The issue of what should be assessed or measured by language assessment, the assessment contract, has naturally been the center of a great deal of debate between people who favored one approach or another. Part 3 will look at the impact that some of the different theoretical approaches to defining constructs have had on language assessment designs. Now let's go to the 3.4 as means of ensuring coherent system with consistent result in is important that procedures followed in making useful product or carrying out a project can be repeated. The steps in the process have to be recorded rigorously enough to make replication possible. This also helps in identifying the likely source of any problems when they do occur. According to the purpose of formality of the assessment, different aspects of the content and administration may need to be more or less strictly applicable. Large-scale tests are often standardized. Both the content of the test and the conditions for administration are carefully delineated and controlled so that each assessee will have the same test-taking experience. For reason of security, the same questions can be used every time a test is given. To avoid this, different forms are produced. These are intended to be similar enough to give comparable result when the assessment is given to the different group of people, to different times and in different places. Assessees who score 57% on form A of a test should also score very close to 57% on form B. If two forms include very different materials and are admired under different conditions, the result will not be directly comparable. In many kinds of formative assessment, standardization is unnecessary and could be counterproductive, as teachers may wish to adjust procedures according to the needs of their students. Nonetheless, some degree of replication is important, even for informal classroom questioning and self-assessment. The successful use of formative assessment depends on embedding regular procedures in the classroom. Teachers need to have consistent approach to questioning and feedback so that the students become familiar with the techniques and understand how to benefit from them. Learners need to be trained to follow set processes. If they are going to be effective self and peer assessment, the descriptive reporting of result needs to be carried out consistently so that users can develop a clear understanding of their meaning. Now let's go to the specification. The key document that communicates standard and guide how an assessment is to be produced, administered, and replicated is known as the specifications. The specifications set out the plan for collecting observable evidence that will inform judgments about how much knowledge, skills, abilities a learner has, connecting theoretical understanding of language with the decision that the users will make about the assessee. The specifications typically include three elements: a design statement, an assessment blueprint, and a task specification. Now let's go to the design statement. When considering the design of a new assessment of an approach to assessment within school curriculum, it is important for those involved to begin by considering, discussing, and collectively answering some fundamental questions. We have the purpose of the assessment, what decision needs to be taken, who should take the decision, what effects will this decision have on the assessee, and if some assessee have particular and who will take the assessment, who will be the assessee, if some assessees have special requirements, how will this be met, how will any adaptations affect the decisions, what aspect of language are relevant to the decision, how are these aspects of language believed to connect to the decisions, how much information about the assessing knowledge, skills, or abilities will be needed to support the decisions. It is an assessment the only way to obtain relevant information. What the other source might be used? Is another suitable assessment already available? Is an assessment of the most efficient way to obtain relevant information? Could other sources be used to supplement the assessment? In classroom assessment, should the focus be on the whole class or on the groups of students, pairs of students, individuals? Will students be assessed or on only subset? What is the best way to report the result so that they are helpful as possible to users? What effect is the implementation of the assessment intended to have on techniques and learning? What unintended negative effect might it have, and what will be done to prevent this? Large-scale assessment programs will document the answers to questions such as this in the information of the Bachman and Palmer, called a design statement. The Fulcher and Davidson called a statement of test purpose. The design statement usually comes at the beginning of the specification and sets out the designer's understanding of the purpose of the assessment, the decisions to be made, stakeholders affected by the decisions, and the individuals responsible for making the decisions. It provides definition of the assessment, construct a description of these assessees, and an explanation of why the approach adopted by the designer is appropriate. Classroom teachers will not need to publish a design statement for each assessment they use in class, but they will nonetheless need to have a clear understanding of the theoretical justification for the content, what theories of language and proficiency underpin the test, and what the test is the way it is. And this is true for other forms and for assessments as is this. Within teaching programs, an explicit statement of the overall approach to assessments and its relationship to learning should be included among the key curriculum documentation. Now let's go to the last one, the blueprint. Just as builders need detailed plans or blueprints in order to construct a building, so those involved of preparing an assessment need more than a design statement if they are going to produce material that matches what the designers intended. Assessment blueprints include clear statements about what content is to be covered and what methods are to be used, how many papers or sections there are, how long the test takes, and so on. And that ends.